After kidnapping the president of a candy company, Izaki Glico, in Osaka, Japan, they demanded a ransom. 1,000,000 police officers were dispatched to catch this terrifying monster. A man stepped off the train to take the ransom. They believed he couldn't escape this time. He tortured them for years. He didn't seem to be in a hurry. He slowly looked around the station, not like someone searching for money, but for people. An undercover detective noticed him immediately. Their eyes met for just a second. The mysterious man smiled, then turned around, boarded another train and vanished. He was what people called in Japan the monster with 21 faces. This is a case in which the entirety of the Japanese people participated, with the whole Japanese police force to solve it, but the criminal was cleverer than all of them. Don't forget to subscribe. My stories are about criminals that shake countries. You'll love them. Imagine buying a box of candy for your child, only to discover later that someone claimed it was laced with cyanide. In 1984, Japan, there was someone far more unpredictable than a mere serial killer. It could have been one person that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere, or it could have been a whole criminal group, a group that taunted the police and terrorized an entire country, and disappeared without leaving behind a single confirmed identity. They called themselves the monster with 21 faces. But before they threatened millions of innocent people, they started with one man. On the night of March 18, 1984, the president of Glico, one of Japan's largest candy companies, arrived home expecting an ordinary evening. But instead, two masked men broke into his house. His wife and daughter were tied up. The intruders threatened the family with weapons, while forcing the company president into a vehicle waiting outside. Within minutes, one of Japan's most powerful businessmen had vanished. The kidnapping shocked the entire country. If criminals could walk into the home of a famous CEO and abduct him, who was safe? Police launched a massive search. Roadblocks appeared across Osaka, and detectives worked around the clock. But the kidnappers remained silent. There was no ransom demand, a phone call, or any clues. Then, 3 days later, the impossible happened. The kidnapped executive escaped. While being held in a storage building, he managed to loosen the ropes around his hands. He waited for the perfect moment, then slipped out through a small opening and ran for his life, barefoot and exhausted, but alive. Japan celebrated. The victim was safe, and the nightmare was over. At least that's what everyone believed, because the kidnappers had no intention of disappearing. The kidnapping was only the first move in a far bigger plan. Write in the comment what you think their objective was. Just weeks later, newspapers across Japan began receiving strange typed letters. The writers admitted they were behind the kidnapping, but instead of demanding sympathy, they laughed at the police and mocked the investigation. The letter began with a chilling greeting. "Dear stupid police officers." It wasn't just a threat. They wanted to humiliate the entire investigation and promised that the real game was only beginning. And at the bottom of every letter, they signed one name: the monster with 21 faces. No one knew who they were or how many they were. But within days, every parent in Japan would have a reason to fear a simple trip to the supermarket. At first, many people thought the letters were just another bluff. Then everything changed. The gang announced they had poisoned Glico candy with cyanide. Police couldn't take the risk. Detectives rushed to supermarkets across Japan. Factory workers searched every warehouse. Store employees began pulling products off their shelves. Then the nightmare became real. Several packages of Glico candy were discovered in stores, and attached to them was a handwritten warning. It read, "Danger. Contains poison." The criminals weren't trying to secretly kill people. They just wanted Japan to know they could. No one could tell whether those were the only poison products, or whether hundreds more were still sitting on store shelves. Within hours, parents stopped buying candy, and schools warned children not to accept sweets from strangers. Supermarkets removed thousands of products, and the financial losses were enormous. But the money wasn't what terrified the investigators. It was the level of planning. The poisoned products had somehow been placed back on store shelves without anyone noticing. That meant the criminals had studied store layouts, employee routines, and exactly how merchandise moved from warehouses to customers. Every successful threat made them bolder. Soon the letters weren't just targeting Glico anymore. Other major food companies began receiving nearly identical messages. The criminals expanded their campaign. The police now faced an impossible problem. They couldn't guard every supermarket and every warehouse and every factory in Japan. Then the letters became personal. The gang mocked detectives by name. One letter read, "You seem to be working very hard, but you still can't catch us." Then they offered something no criminal normally would. They said in the letter, "We'll give you some hints." At first, the investigators thought it was another joke, but it wasn't. The gang revealed that the getaway car was gray, that they had bought their food from a Dai supermarket, and the typewriter used to write the letters was a pen writer. Every clue was technically true, yet none of them brought police any closer. They joked about how many officers had been assigned to the case. They even left out failed surveillance operations that had been made public. The investigators were stunned. How could the criminals know details that only the police were supposed to know? Did they have someone inside law enforcement, or were they simply watching every move from the shadows? No one knew the answer to that question. But one thing became painfully clear. This wasn't a gang acting on impulse. Every letter was carefully written, and every threat was timed. Every move forced the police to waste thousands of hours chasing dead ends. And then the criminals raised the stakes again. They demanded millions of yen, but collecting the money wasn't the real objective. What they wanted was to prove they could outsmart an entire country's police force, and they were about to do exactly that. The police believed this was finally their chance. The gang had demanded the ransom worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. If they showed up to collect it, the nightmare would finally be over. So investigators planned one of the largest undercover operations in modern Japanese history. All of Japan's police force was secretly deployed. Some disguised themselves as commuters. Others posed as train station employees, taxi drivers, businessmen, even ordinary shoppers. Every entrance, platform, and every nearby street was under surveillance. The police were convinced the criminals had no way to escape. Then a man stepped off a train. He wore a baseball cap, dark sunglasses, and unlike everyone else, he didn't seem to be in a hurry. Witnesses later described him as strangely calm. He slowly looked around the station, not like someone searching for money, but for people. An undercover detective noticed him immediately. Their eyes met for just a second. The mysterious man smiled, turned around, then boarded another train and vanished. The investigators later nicknamed him the Fox-Eyed Man. Minutes later, the ransom operation failed. No one collected the money. Instead, another letter arrived. After telling you all this, you still can't catch us? Then came the line that infuriated investigators. Should we kidnap the head of the prefectural police too? It wasn't just mockery anymore. It was psychological warfare. The police had failed again, and the investigation dragged on for months. And more companies received threats. Millions of dollars of products were destroyed or recalled. Thousands of detectives chased hundreds of leads, but nothing worked. And then in August 1985, the pressure became unbearable. That the lead investigator, exhausted by the relentless public criticism and the inability to catch the criminals, died by suicide. It was one of the darkest moments in the history of the Japanese law enforcement. And then, without warning, the letter stopped. There was no final ransom demand or farewell, just silence. Police continued investigating for years. More than 1 million police officers had been poured into the case, yet they never identified a single confirmed member of the group. Eventually, the statute of limitations expired. Legally, the case was over, and to this day, no one knows who the monster with 21 faces really was. Were they one person, a small gang, or a much larger criminal organization? They kidnapped the president of one of Japan's biggest companies, terrified millions of families, forced supermarkets across the country to empty their shelves, humiliated the police at every turn, and then simply disappeared, leaving behind one final letter. We have decided to forgive Glico. We are bad guys, and it is fun to lead the life of a bad man. And then silence. It became one of the greatest unsolved criminal mysteries in Japanese history.